Hello, I'm Esther Githo-Yuat. It's Tuesday, February 22nd. This is Africa 54.
Putin orders troops to separatist regions in Ukraine and recognizes their independence. We'll explain the implications. Scores are dead and dozens are injured following a massive blast at an informal gold mine in southwestern Burkina Faso. And should intellectual property protection be temporarily waived on coronavirus vaccines to enable countries to produce their own? We'll have details.
We begin our broadcast with the latest developments in the crisis gripping Eastern Europe. Russian tanks barreled into eastern Ukraine overnight Tuesday under the pretense of a peacekeeping mission and to what Russia says is to protect two breakaway republics. The United States and Britain announced additional sanctions Tuesday against Russia after Russian President Vladimir Putin recognized the Russian-occupied regions of Donetsk and Luhansk in eastern Ukraine as independent states. U.S. President Joe Biden on Monday ordered an initial round of targeted sanctions prohibiting U.S. individuals and entities from investment, trade and financing in Donetsk and Luhansk. VOA's Heather Murdoch and Jan Borchardt have more from eastern Ukraine.
Soldiers and journalists flee to shelters after a bomb hits Novolugansk, a small Ukrainian town near the border with Russia. In recent days, Ukrainian officials say violence in parts of Ukraine near the contact line between government-controlled areas and areas controlled by Russian-backed separatists has increased dramatically. Russians and Ukrainians are accusing each other of ignoring international ceasefire agreements.
In the past 24 hours in this territory, no single group within our military unit was not attacked.
And on Monday, Russia reiterated its demand that Ukraine be permanently barred from NATO as a condition of peace.
If Russia faces the danger of Ukraine joining NATO, the threat to our country will increase substantially, because Article 5 of NATO's Establishment Treaty says that all NATO countries should fight on one of its members' sides if it is attacked.
And while world leaders continue to say diplomatic solutions may still be possible, in recent weeks, efforts to solve the crisis have failed, and NATO has repeatedly refused to comply with Russia's demands. Many buildings and businesses in Novolugansk have been abandoned for years, and for those who remain, sporadic violence has become the norm. Ukrainian military leaders say ceasefire violations have increased markedly in recent days, from 98 ceasefire violations a day on February 19, compared with 5 violations a day 3 months ago. Yet most of the country remains quiet but nervous about the coming days and weeks. Here in this small town about 5 kilometers away from the border with Russia, we get an idea of how very diverse this country is in their opinions of this conflict. Many families here speak Russian and have relatives living across the border. Since 2014, commerce and travel have been difficult, causing local business to drop by about 50%.
When people came from Russia, all the shops were selling more. Now it is so much less. Also, a lot of people have relatives in Russia they can't visit. It is so sad.
This train station used to host 30 passenger trains a day back and forth to Russia. Now, only cargo trains cross the border. Locals say families in this town are also often divided between supporters of Russia and supporters of Ukraine. But with the border region near the brink of war, many say they are united in the need for peace and security. Heather.
The United Nations Security Council held a rare nighttime emergency meeting on Monday at the request of Ukraine, the U.S. and other countries, as Russia appears to be on the brink of a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Kenya, at the Security Council meeting, said it is gravely concerned with Russia's actions.
Kenya is gravely concerned by the announcement made by the Russian Federation to recognize Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine as independent states. In our considered view, this action and announcement breaches the territorial integrity of Ukraine. We do not deny that there may be serious security concerns in these regions, but they cannot justify today's recognition of these regions as independent states, not when there are multiple diplomatic tracks available and underway that have the ability to offer peaceful solutions.
Kenyan Ambassador Martin Kimani drew parallels to African history and spoke about nations in Africa that had their borders drawn by distant colonial powers. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is on a 4-day tour to 3 African countries with stops in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Senegal and Guinea-Bissau. Erdogan is aiming to boost relations with these African countries. VOA's Paul Ndiho has more.
Turkey's latest diplomatic drive in Africa continues to Senegal and Guinea-Bissau, after several bilateral cooperation agreements were signed between Kinshasa and Ankara during a brief visit by the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan to the DRC. Senegalese President Macky Sall and Erdogan highlighted the close friendship between Senegal and Turkey during a press conference in Darkar.
The greatest manifestation of our close friends is mainly in our trade agreements and investment. In addition to mutual investments, our trade volume is increasing day by day.
President Macky Sall praised Turkish companies that have initiated various investment projects in the country and says investments between the two countries should increase even more. I'm satisfied with the political relations and economic cooperation between Turkey and Senegal. These are long-standing relations with a solid and diversified legal framework that touches on areas as valid as political consultations, infrastructure, energy, agriculture, education, water, transport, environment, industry, trade, culture, and defense.
Le commerce, la culture et la défense.
Bilateral trade between Turkey and Senegal reached a whopping $540 million in 2021.
Despite the epidemic, our bilateral trade volume in 2021 increased by 42% compared to the previous year and exceeded $540 million. As the President has just stated, our goal is for that figure to reach $1 billion.
Ankara is seeking to strengthen its presence on the African continent, with Erdogan visiting Africa nearly 40 times since 2005, both as Prime Minister and President. Turkey has opened up some 40 Turkish diplomatic missions in the same time since 2003. The volume of Turkey's trade with Africa has increased from 2 billion to at least 25 billion. Paul Ndiho, VOA News.
At least 60 people are dead and dozens more are injured following a blast at an informal gold mine in southwestern Burkina Faso. Clara Frank has more.
The cause of the explosion in Pony province was not yet known. Pony's High Commissioner Antoine Douamba told state television. Images showed a large blast site of felled trees and destroyed tin houses. Bodies lay on the ground covered in mats. It was also not clear exactly what kind of gold mining went on at the site. Burkina Faso is home to some major gold mines run by international companies, but also to hundreds of smaller, informal sites that operate without oversight or regulation. Children frequently work in these so-called artisanal mines. Accidents are common. Burkina Faso, one of the world's least developed countries, is under attack from Islamist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, who seek to control mining sites as a means to fund their violent attacks. Monday's blast was hundreds of miles from where these groups usually operate, and there was no sign that Islamist militants were involved. Clara Frank, Washington.
A coalition of young Nigerian activists protested on Tuesday, demanding that authorities sign an amended national election bill that would improve transparency, inclusion, and election planning. Timothy Obiezu has the details from Abuja.
There are at least 26 different civil society groups represented at this protest to compel the president to sign the Nigerian Electoral Bill of 2022. The activists say constitutionally the president is supposed to sign the bill 1 year ahead of the polls to enable electoral body adequately prepare for the elections. But ahead of Tuesday's rallies, President Buhari's spokesperson Femi Adesina said, quote, interest groups are cashing in on what they consider a delay in the signing of the electoral bill by the president to foment civil disorder and muddy the waters, end quote. He also said the president had until March 1st to sign the bill. Improvements on the new bill include early release of election funds, inclusion of people with disabilities, electronic accreditation of voters, and electronic transmission of results. The electronic transmission of results has been subject to debates in the past. Many activists here believe it could drastically reduce incidents of rigging and say authorities are deliberately reluctant to sign the bill. Nigeria is due to go to the polls in February next year. The elections have been described by many as the most significant in Nigeria's recent history, saying mass protests against police brutality and bad governance, which broke out in October 2020, have sparked fresh interest among young people trying to seize power at all costs. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Abuja, Nigeria.
A key international monetary fund supported program funding military wages and other essential services in Somalia could expire in May if there are any further delays to elections, according to an international monetary fund representative. Split by civil war since 1991, Somalia has paid its bills since 2017 thanks to the IMF, as it is slowly rebuilt its institutions amid a violent Islamist insurgency. But the program will terminate automatically if a new government is not in place to conclude a review of it by May 17th, according to Laura Jaramillo, the IMF mission chief for Somalia. The UN expert on human rights in Sudan is visiting Khartoum to look into allegations of human rights abuse during the protests that have rocked Sudan in the past few months. Adama Dieng is in Khartoum 1 month after Sudan's authorities asked for the postponement of his visit, according to the UN Human Rights Council. Dieng was a UN Special Advisor on the prevention of genocide and served as an investigator for the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. He was appointed in November to monitor the human rights situation in Sudan after the October 25th military coup. Goma Al-Wakil, head of the Human Rights Department at the Justice Ministry, says Dieng's mission is to verify allegations of human rights abuses during protests that have been taking place since the takeover.
The expert's mission is to verify allegations and claims of human rights abuses in Sudan in the demonstrations that have taken place in the country since October 25th, 2021, and submit a report on them to the Human Rights Council in June 2022, and also to give a verbal briefing on the ongoing events and the state of human rights to the Council in March 2022.
Since a popular uprising removed Omar al-Bashir and his government from power in 2019, more than 80 people have been killed and over 2,000 injured, according to a Sudanese medical group. Still to come, Doctors Without Borders calls on the South African government to revoke COVID-related patents. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our technology report when Africa 54 correspondent Paul Ndiho talks to a young college student in Zambia who is using her coding skills to teach other young girls and women. But first, let's check in with Heidi Adams on what's coming up on Wednesday's Straight Talk Africa.
Russia has plunged Europe into crisis. Join me, Heidi Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa as we discuss the presence of Russia and China in Africa. Are the West's warnings about these two world powers' influence on the continent warranted, or overblown? We'll also hear what Africans think about all the political, economic and military deals being made in their countries. An in-depth discussion on Russia and China in Africa on the next Straight Talk Africa.
South Africa is conducting a nationwide population and housing census. The census was supposed to be completed in October 2021, but was delayed due to disruptions caused by the global COVID-19 pandemic. VOA's Paul Ndiho has more.
In Alexandra Township in Johannesburg, population census workers are surveying hostels housing women. Overcrowded and poorly maintained, women living in these hostels say they feel the government has forgotten about them and the deplorable conditions they live in.
Because it's serious, we are not working. We are staying in the place, how the places look like. Because there is no electricity, there's no water. Yeah. We are not working.
In this hostel, hundreds of women live crammed together in fear, often without running water or electricity for days.
We had enough, Papa.
The Census 2022 project is set to showcase Statistics South Africa, the National Statistical Service of South Africa, and their new technological advances as it leaps into a new era of digital data collection.
Now we are visiting the households at their houses. So as you can see, this is one of the hostels. But this is a single-sex hostel. It's a female hostel, where these females, some of them are staying with their children, which they're staying as a household.
This is South Africa's fourth population count post-democracy and the country's first digital census, where at least 165,000 field workers are deployed across the country to count everyone within its borders. From an aerial view, Alexandra Township appears as if it's caved from stone. It is nearly treeless, a stark contrast with the leafy parks and avenues of Sandton, an affluent area in Gauteng province. The streets are laid out in a perfect grid, but sharks fill every gap and every contour within the grids. The city of Johannesburg is actively trying to address this challenge caused by apartheid urban planning, where crime is rising and women live in fear. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
It is common for inventors to file patents to protect their ideas, inventions, and products. But observers say intellectual property protection should be waived on coronavirus vaccines to enable countries the right to make their own vaccines for greater access. But critics say some countries do not have the capacity to produce enough vaccines and drugs, even if the intellectual property rights are waived. Doctors Without Borders, MSF, is calling on South Africa's government to revoke COVID-related patents given to Moderna's vaccine and Eli Lilly's treatment, baricitinib. Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu spoke with Yuan Kyung-Hu, senior legal and policy advisor for MSF Access Campaign, for more insight on the issue.
We consider it's very significant to have this very bold proposal in the global pandemic of a century for reasons that in the past 20 years, MSF as a medical organization have witnessed many examples where a practice of protecting intellectual property, life-saving medical products have caused access barrier, particularly in low and middle income countries. But unfortunately, we see in the pandemic, we see a lot of business as usual when companies who hold patents and other intellectual property on vaccines and medicines and diagnostics continue to prioritize markets who have better purchase power, when the reality is that many of those medicines and vaccines can be produced directly by developers and manufacturers in low and middle income countries if there is no legal barrier to hinder them to do so, if they have access to needed technology. And the TRIPS waiver proposal led by South Africa and India is precisely aiming to achieve that, so that temporarily many countries can put aside the prioritization of intellectual protection, giving priority to production and supply of life-saving medical technology.
Pharmaceutical companies are in the business for profit at the end of the day, so can we blame them if they don't share the patent, the intellectual property?
It's not because solely like pharmaceutical companies are doing the magic. It is because massive public support and many accumulated efforts by scientists, public health agencies, public funding from different governments, and many general public who joined the clinical trials with the aim that we need to get out of this pandemic. When we see there's so many contributions, but the mechanism is working in a way that all of the other contributions will be wiped out, and only one company determine who gets what once they get the patent protection. But unfortunately, in the pandemic, we're facing this system, which is working like that. The fruit of all of the contribution was appropriated by one private entity who then have the ultimate decision-making power to see where the production should occur, who gets what, at what price, who gets what first. We need to find a temporary measure to rebalance the power. So some countries who may have a little bit less purchasing power, but then they can have a little bit more policy space to move around, to do something by themselves.
Doctors Without Borders, MSF, is calling on the South African government to revoke patents on baricitinib, made by US-based Eli Lilly, and the COVID-19 vaccine made by the Moderna company, which is also US-based. Talk to us, first of all, about baricitinib and how it's being utilized during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Baricitinib is a medicine that recently has been recommended by World Health Organization as a treatment for COVID patients. There's many therapeutics under development. This is among the very few therapeutics that WHO actually recommends. So baricitinib is not a new medicine, so it's already being developed to treat other diseases. This is a recommended treatment for severe and critical patients to suppress the overstimulation of the immune system. So when people develop severe COVID, many countries would use a monoclonal antibody by injection. In many of the low and middle income countries, those type of treatments are not available yet. And also it could be complicated to use in some of the settings if the facility is not available. So the baricitinib is an oral treatment. The cost of production of this medicine is not so expensive. So we're not saying companies don't make money. They still make money, but they're reasonable.
What sorts of implications are we seeing now on the ground?
If we have any treatment to help people to go home early, that will be very significant. But if it's too expensive, people cannot use it. Because in reality, do we really need to pay such a high price for the medicine? The answer is definitely not, because as we shared in our analysis, Indian and Bangladeshi generic company developed a generic version, and they are offering cheaper price. Countries like South Africa and many other countries in the continent have existing generic manufacturers who can actually produce that if there's no legal barrier. The implication of holding this monopoly is really prohibit countries from helping themselves without legal risk.
MSF has called on South African government to seek the revocation of the patents that was granted to pharmaceutical corporations Eli Lilly and Moderna. So how would that work? Can the patent be lifted or denied after being granted?
Actually, we hope many governments could consider this approach. And there have been a lot of attempts and efforts made as well, because lifting a granted patent is a legal right allowed by international law. So countries have that right to exercise, particularly now it's for the purpose of protecting public health. So they have full right to do so. So that is why we call on our South African government to do this.
We reached out to South Africa's health ministry, but there was no response to our request for comment. Moderna pledged early on that it would not enforce patents related to its experimental COVID-19 vaccine while the pandemic is ongoing. The Los Angeles City Council is opening a tiny home village in West Lake in an effort to combat the homelessness problem. The program aims to create low-cost housing for homeless people. Ginia Dulon has the story.
A small village of 56 tiny houses opened in Los Angeles in January 2022 as part of the city's effort to address its exploding homelessness problem. This small development is expected to house a little over 100 people. It's the city's 9th such project. Denise lives in this tiny home after being homeless for 3 years. The space is designed for 2 people, but for now she lives here alone. The home is 6 square meters and includes a small TV, a heater, and air conditioning.
There's a place right there, you know, an opportunity to switch things around. You know what I'm saying?
These small homes are designed to provide modest comfort, safety, and a roof over people's heads. Residents also get a guaranteed breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Social workers help the residents rehabilitate and look for a job. Tyler Kirkpatrick with Urban Alchemy, the company that manages this particular village, says unlike similar programs, this one does not include as many restrictions.
We don't have curfews. Our guidelines around substance abuse or substance use is very different because we don't kick anybody out for drinking or for doing drugs. When folks are in a space where they feel like they're ready to try something different and maybe fight their addiction, we have staff that are immediately available to help them to take whatever next step that is.
Kirkpatrick says an addict is more likely to have a successful rehabilitation if he or she moves to new and friendlier environment. But some believe the program is too expensive. The Los Angeles Times reported that a village of 39 homes in the city of North Hollywood costs about $5 million. Meanwhile, authorities say each tiny house costs between $5,000 and $8,000. But some city leaders still back the program.
People are worth investing in. These folks have seen enough trauma. They've had great challenges and difficulty in their lives, and everyone deserves to be invested in so that they can reach their potential at some point. That's what makes a society humane and compassionate.
The villages are seen as a temporary solution, and residents are expected to move after 3 to 6 months to subsidized housing. Authorities say that may be difficult because currently there is a shortage of permanent subsidized housing in the city. Ginia Dulon for VOA News, Los Angeles.
And that's our show for today. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.